your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News Weekend Edition.
Well, happy Easter, everyone. I'm Naveen Day. Thanks for joining us for a look at what made headlines this past week. After recovering a stolen truck and high-end bicycle, Lethbridge police arrested 2 men. On April 15th, the owner of a Ford F-150, previously reported stolen from Coaldale, saw the vehicle near the par 3 golf course and attempted to block it in. A man exited and ran into the coulees while the driver rammed the other vehicle and then fled in the truck. LPS and RCMP coordinated a search of the river valley and located the passenger hiding in the coulees. The other man was later seen in possession of a high-end bicycle. After an eventual foot race, the man was apprehended. During a search, he was found to have had on him the Ford keys and methamphetamine, and police determined the bike he was riding had been stolen from Brooks. Quinn Mitchell Pazzo, age 28 of Brooks, was arrested. He is currently in custody, awaiting a judicial interim release hearing. And a confirmed case of measles is prompting a public alert to potential exposures in Lethbridge. On April 11th, an infected person visited Costco between 3:30 and 7 p.m. and also the Southside Walmart between 5 and 8 p.m. According to Alberta Health Services, anyone who was at those stores at those times, who was born in or after 1970 and has less than 2 documented doses of the measles vaccine, is at risk for developing measles. They should self-monitor for symptoms and review their immunization records. The worldwide popularity of pickleball has spread to Lethbridge. The Lethbridge and District Exhibition, along with the Lethbridge and Coaldale pickleball clubs, are putting on a huge tournament from May 2nd to 4th. Paul Kingsmith, Director of Community Engagement for the exhibition, says the event will boost the sport in southern Alberta. The event will be held at the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Centre. Kingsmith explains the importance of having a venue in Lethbridge which can host an event of this kind.
To bring in an event like this is really meeting a community need. It's what we heard from the pickleball clubs, that they needed a location to host something like this. They needed the resources to host this size of tournament, and they have bigger goals in mind as to where they want to go with tournaments like this. So to be able to provide a venue and be a part of building this tournament is really something that we're excited about. You know, when we look at revenue opportunities for LDA as an organization and for the Agri-Food Hub and Trade Center as a building, we identified strategic areas where we want to be involved. Obviously, agriculture is at our core. Trade events and conferences make a lot of sense, but we looked at the sport realm, and with the space that we have, we're looking at whether or not we can host volleyball and basketball type events in those trade halls with the wide open space that it is.
We want to hopefully expand this into a regional sport so that we can hold provincial tournaments and hopefully a national tournament.
Sounds like a lot of fun. The tournament will feature men's and women's singles and doubles matches, as well as junior boys and girls categories. It's a Tier 4 Pickleball Canada sanctioned event and will even include referees for all medal matches. And if you live in the tiny Alberta towns of Carmangay or Champion, voting in the federal election is going to be a bit of a challenge. That is because residents of those villages will have to travel to Lamond to attend the nearest voting station. Champion is a quiet community of approximately 400 residents and is comprised mainly of seniors. Elections Canada deemed their usual polling station, the Pioneer Club, to not meet polling station requirements despite being recently renovated. Bridge City News visited Champion to hear reactions from the community's residents.
It's absolutely stupid. It's ridiculous. We've always been able to vote here in town. It just seems a little bit weird to have to go that far. I mean, even to Vulcan is one thing. That's, you know, why can't we go to Vulcan?
We've always voted at the Pioneer Club every election, whether it's federal, provincial, or municipal. And they never told anybody. I guess our mayor didn't even know. So it's kind of hard because there's a lot of seniors in town that don't drive, and it's 30 minutes drive from here.
They deemed it inaccessible and unsafe, I think they noted the building to be. So with all our, accessibility ramps and, door access and the brand new renovation, a lot of that really doesn't add up in my opinion. So I don't know. It seems very one-sided and unfair to everybody around here.
Now, Elections Canada says this is a byproduct of the recent redrawing of riding boundaries. In a statement, they also say there are no locations within these communities that meet Elections Canada's requirements, mainly accessibility for the polling locations, given the age of most of the buildings. After the break, news and commentary from across the country and Alberta. Automobile companies that continue to manufacture vehicles in Canada will receive an exemption from Ottawa's retaliatory tariffs on the U.S. Federal Finance Minister Francois-Philippe Champagne made the announcement that auto manufacturers will be allowed to import a certain number of U.S.-assembled vehicles free of the countermeasure tariffs Ottawa imposed in response to Donald Trump's levies. The vehicles must comply with the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement on Trade. Most polls show Mark Carney's Liberal Party leading, with the Conservative Party hot on their trail. Brian Lilley, political columnist for the Toronto Sun, says it's Ontario the Conservatives must win over in order to win the election. Here is part of his interview with BCN's Jeannette Rocher.
Daryl Bricker, who's the CEO of Ipsos Global Public Affairs, one of the oldest, biggest polling firms in Canada, he said that, excuse me, that he's picking up momentum. We've seen some polls that a bit closer, still with the Liberal lead. One poll that seems to be an outlier, even has the Conservatives tied, effectively tied, or within 1 point of the Liberals. So, look, at the end of the day, the Conservatives need to win in Ontario. Right now, they're not. They're doing well in BC, another must-win area. They're doing very well in Alberta. We expect that. But they need to rise up in Ontario, and that is just not happening at the moment. So we'll see what these debates are like. We'll see what the last 2 weeks of the campaign are like, but that's got to be their focus.
Yeah, and of course, there's always plenty of discussion about polls and then versus the rallies. And some people, of course, say they don't even believe the polls. So where do you sit on that question, Brian?
I do believe the polls. And look, I know folks will say, well, 2016, they got it wrong. Hillary, they said was going to win, or Brexit. Look, those were bad interpretations of the polls. I looked at the same polling results and I predicted Donald Trump would win in 2016. I looked at the same Brexit poll results and said, okay, Brexit, the leave side is going to win. It's interpretation and knowing how the map works in an election. And that's why, the national polling numbers, very interesting, but really what you need to focus on are the regionals. So Conservatives are doing pretty well in Quebec. They're not doing well in Atlantic Canada or Ontario. If they're not going to win in Atlantic Canada, they need more seats in Ontario. And right now, the Liberals are still poised to win the majority of seats in Ontario. So you can only win every seat in Saskatchewan once. You can only win 32 out of 37 seats in Alberta once. They need to win in Ontario. That's got to be the key to this election.
Also, with polls, it's all dependent on how many people are surveyed. How many people are surveyed in the general polls that you are looking at here, Brian?
It ranges from the serious pollsters. It ranges from around 1,000 to, I think Abacus Data recently put one out. It was 2,900 people. Look, there are polls that I think are less legitimate than others, but the main companies, Ipsos, Abacus, Leger, these are well-respected polling firms that have gotten the last several elections right, or minor differences. One party got 18% instead of the 19% predicted in the poll. Well, that's a pretty good, determination ahead of time. And so, do the rallies matter? Absolutely, the rallies matter, and it's a sign of how committed Poilievre's voters are. And even the polling shows that the Conservative voters are more committed, more determined to vote than Liberal ones. We'll see if that changes, if it solidifies. Poilievre's got to, if he's losing with people over 55, then he's got to hope that everyone that's committed to voting for him under 55, and there's more of them, 19 million versus 13 million, he's got to hope that every one of those under 55 voting for him brings out a friend or a spouse or a relative. And if they do that, then yeah, he can win.
Mark Carney just apologized for Liberal campaign workers passing out buttons at the Canada Strong and Free conference in Ottawa to make it look like Poilievre Conservatives were just like Donald Trump. So, Brian, you have something to say about this, and you're even comparing it to some old buttons from 2006 that were handed out way back.
Yeah, this is an old tradition in politics, but normally it's just about making fun of your opponent. And so there were buttons that had Jenny Byrne, the campaign manager's name, crossed out, and then Corey Tonight put underneath it, saying that Pierre should fire Jenny. There were ones that just made fun of the Conservatives. And that's normal, but it's the ones that said, stop the steal, and do you believe the polls? These are attempts to say that the Conservatives are just like Donald Trump. So that's why I think these ones cross the line. Look, here's an old button from the 2006 Liberal Convention.
Can't believe you still
I don't
have
know if
that.
you can. Don't know if you can see that. It's it says Uncle Iggy wants you, and it's Michael Ignatieff, who was running back then. Didn't win. You have Vote Bob. Who needs Ontario anyway? Referencing back to Bob Rae's disastrous time as Ontario Premier. There's a lot of these things. If they're in good fun, that's fine. If you're trying to fool people to make them believe that these guys are something they're not, you could be in trouble with the law. A few lawyers have looked at it and said this could violate the Elections Act, could be a violation of the law. We'll see where that goes, if anything. The two staffers in charge of it, who this came out in a story because they were boasting about it in bars in earshot of journalists, they've simply been reassigned. They haven't been fired. They're just given different jobs in the campaign, no longer making buttons.
Alberta is without a chief medical officer of health after the government declined to renew the contract of Dr. Mark Joffe. The Office of Health Minister Adriana LaGrange said Tuesday that Joffe's contract had expired a day earlier. It says an interim replacement will be announced shortly and that a search for a permanent replacement has begun. Joffe was serving in the role on an interim basis after the provincial government fired Dr. Dina Hinshaw in 2022. This week, the Alberta government introduced Bill 53, the so-called Compassionate Intervention Act. The bill would allow families, guardians, healthcare professionals, or police to force an addict into treatment when they become a danger to themselves or others.
Now, I do want to be clear. The Compassionate Intervention Act is not sweeping legislation that applies to every person who's dealing with addiction or substance use. It is only for the most serious cases where all other options have failed. It's important to remember that people in the clutches of addiction are unable to help themselves. The insidious power of addiction means the only thing that matters is their next high. It isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a treatable illness. And to families with loved ones suffering from addiction, compassionate intervention offers new hope. Hope that their loved ones can get the help that they need to break their addiction, connect with their families, and manage their life in recovery.
The government plans to spend $180 million over 3 years to build compassionate care centres in Edmonton and Calgary. Critics of the plan say while it has the potential to protect the safety of others, it could violate individual rights. Now, to share his thoughts on the Alberta government's plan on mandatory drug treatment and much more is Tyler Dawson. He is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post. Here is part of his interview with BCN's Paul Arthur.
This was sort of an election promise in 2023. Reporters have been checking in with the government sort of, every few months since then to find out what the timeline was looking like on this. And the reality seems to be that it just took a couple of years to kind of figure out how to do it, to sort of look through all the research, to come up with, sort of a structure for it that the government thinks is going to be constitutional. The way it's going to work basically is that someone would apply to a commission that will have a lawyer, a member of the public, and a doctor on it to have someone sort of apprehended and then put into these sort of mandatory treatment regimes. That could either be a 3-month stay in a secure facility or it could be a 6-month sort of community kind of program. And there will be, opportunities to review that. These decisions could be appealed to the courts if necessary, those sorts of things. But the timeline on it is going to be a little bit interesting because obviously these secure facilities aren't built yet. And the government is hoping that the system will be sort of fully up and running by 2029. In the interim, the regulations will be developed. Perhaps people will be put in, hospital beds or something like that in sort of the next year or so. But this is not like kicking off imminently. It's still going to take some time to shake this out a little bit. And of course, 2029 means that that's 2 years after the next provincial election. If the UCP wins that 2027 election, you can imagine that they would sustain this sort of policy. But you can also imagine a world in which the NDP wins that election, and then, what happens to this entire system if they form government. So I think it's fair to say this is a little bit up in the air. And of course, that doesn't even account for the other part of this, which is obviously going to be the legal challenges against it. The government is confident they're going to win. And of course, they could use the notwithstanding clause if they lose, but certainly that's going to be another factor in the months and years ahead.
Yeah. If they do lose, have they expressed as to whether they would go that far to use the notwithstanding clause?
No, they haven't actually. They've sort of been like, if that comes up, we'll deal with it when it comes up. They've been kind of cagey on the use of the notwithstanding clause generally, compared to Saskatchewan, for example, which has been a little bit more forthright. It's especially with, sort of the school pronoun stuff across the border there. And I think part of that reason is you set yourself up to lose the argument a little bit if you say, well, it might be unconstitutional, but, then we're going to, that's a perfectly legitimate political and legal point to make. But in terms of, trying to sell this policy to the public, I think you don't want to admit up front that you're even considering the possibility that something is contrary to the charter.
Yeah, again, it's just kind of one of those things, will this work or won't it, right? But I can understand the families who have a loved one who's, overdosed hundreds of times and they're out of options, right? And they don't want to see them die, right? So, will this work? And it's probably not going to work 100%, but, is it worth a shot? I guess we'll find out. Alberta, by the way, in the midst of that measles outbreak as well, speaking of health issues, haven't been any deaths so far, thankfully, but some are calling on the provincial government to make a bigger push to get people vaccinated. So, herd immunity, they say, requires 95% vaccination. Alberta not at that point, I don't think, right now. So, your thoughts on that?
We're close. I think we're 92.6% or something like that. So we're within a few percentage points. The issue, of course, is that there's a huge variation across the province. There's some communities where the vaccination rate's like in the 60% kind of range, which is obviously puts folks at a bit of a risk there. And one of the things that I didn't know until I was sort of looking into this stuff this week is that measles is like, it's maybe the most transmissible virus that, transfers in humans. It's much more contagious than COVID-19, for example. And of course, I think we've only had about 80 measles cases. The majority of them seem to have been resolved. But obviously, it's still spreading around the community a little bit. And so there's been this sort of mini controversy going on about whether or not the chief medical officer of health got involved early enough, whether or not the government's doing enough. And of course, then we found out on Tuesday that the chief medical officer of health, his contract was up on Monday. So he's out the door. And the government's going to be looking for a new one. So a bit of an odd scenario.
Is that directly tied to the measles case then, you think, or were there other factors in here?
No, it doesn't seem to be. It seems to be just, sort of the end of his contract. He was on a 2-year contract after Dina Hinshaw left, and it seems to be up. But obviously the timing looks rather strange because last week everyone was like, where is he? Why is he not out talking about the measles outbreak? And then on Friday there was a statement put out, but no press conference or anything. And then we find out Tuesday he's gone. So I think it looks odd, even if it's, totally above board.
Yeah, and who knows? Again, maybe there was a last-minute decision on this, so maybe that affected his, delayed his action on the measles thing. I don't know, but interesting anyway. Well, the investigations, of course, into the AHS procurement scandal keep on rolling along. This week, though, the NDP moving a motion in the legislature calling for a judge-led public inquiry. Now, that didn't go through. It failed. But that one UCP caucus member voting for it, Peter Guthrie. Now, again, he was the former infrastructure minister, I believe, right, before, well, he actually resigned with concerns over this whole government procurement issue, right? So do you think he's going to get kicked out?
Yeah, hard to imagine you wouldn't at this point, actually. I mean, that's a pretty big and bold step to take. I mean, I think I was surprised, actually, that he wasn't fully removed from caucus after he resigned, because he did call the government out in his resignation letter at that point as well. So I have to say I'm surprised he's still in caucus. Wouldn't surprise me at all if he was out of caucus by the end of the week or early next week. But I think there's about 6 investigations going on into this thing. You've got an RCMP investigation, an Auditor General investigation. There's a judge from Manitoba was appointed to look into this. But what the NDP is looking for was, something beyond that. Public inquiries have some more powers than some of these other groups. And Guthrie, as you mentioned, had expressed concerns with procurement, and so he voted in favor of that, as did actually, I think, Scott Sinclair, an independent. But as you also said, motion failed, so we're stuck with the existing investigations and not getting a new one.
Yeah, I'm curious if Guthrie has a lot of support for his stance within his own riding. I don't know if you've heard any feedback on that at all, or.
No, I haven't heard anything about that. And the UCP generally has been pretty closed ranks around this thing. And so far we don't have very much knowledge about it, other than what's been reported in the media and what's been in sort of the dueling court filings over the firing of the former Alberta Health Services CEO. So, I think everyone's kind of waiting for these investigations to get to the bottom of it and hoping they turn something up, or hope they turn nothing up, I suppose, would be the other alternative here.
Yeah, well, it could go either way. I just don't know.
No.
And the report, I think the Ethics Commissioner report, what is that, due end of June, is it?
That sounds right. Yeah. The Auditor General's been looking, well, it might be 2 separate reports, actually, but the Auditor General's for sure looking into it, because there's this other little simmering controversy here where the government told people who were contacted by the Auditor General's office to forward the request to government lawyers instead of responding on their own, which the Auditor General's office says is, well, they're like, no, this isn't how it works. So a little bit of another controversy there.
As we celebrate Easter and families gather this weekend, many people have some special holiday traditions, including certain culinary delights. Jeannette Rocher visited a local bakery to find out how they make some of those traditional favorites. Take a look.
Well, Easter is right around the corner, and that usually means great snacks. We're talking cookies, chocolate, Easter bunnies, and hot cross buns. I'm here at Bootsma Bakery with Nana. Yes,
exciting.
So it is
Thanks,
exciting.
guys, for coming around. Yeah.
I bet you guys are really super busy these days.
Oh, we are. It's been a crazy morning today. I'm sure people are preparing for the Easter, and we have loads of orders coming, especially for hot cross buns.
So what makes this recipe so special? Is it a family recipe that's been around over 120 years?
It is. It's actually like tradition goes on, and the name Bootsma has been in existence for a long time. And our boss, who's Steve Bootsma, he's 4th generation. So, what that means, it's been there for quite a long time. So that's how it makes that recipe very special. You won't get it anywhere. And it takes a long time to prepare. And this is artisan. It means that it's used by the hand with love. Our bakers actually take their time and prepare these out for you. So I'm hoping that you will see how that is done. We use that special, as I said earlier, a special blend of spices, and then only raisins. And then we carefully crust them with Bavarian cream. Carefully done, so you get the right lineup.
Well, I can't wait to see this actually happening. So we're gonna go talk to Steve, who's actually baking those buns. Okay, so now we've transitioned into the mixing room. I'm joined by Stephen Bootsma of Bootsma Bakery, and you are going to tell me how these delicious hot cross buns are made. I know it's your busy time right now for Easter, so it looks like you have a bunch of bowls right here. So maybe
yep. So
explain.
here we've got our flour mix right here.
And it's just regular flour?
And this is just regular plain flour.
Okay.
And then we have our yeast already in the bowl. It's a fresh yeast. And then we have our blend of secret spices. And then we have our shortening. And we use a vegetable shortening. And then we have our salt and sugar. And then we have a whey powder. And then we use hot water.
Okay.
And then our eggs, and of course our raisins.
So this is the part where you're gonna roll it into the little bun ball,
Yep.
basically.
Basically.
Okay.
And now we're gonna spread our dough out. And we're gonna put it on our plate. So we'll take it. And then we'll make sure it's centered. And then we're gonna take this guy, and it's got a whole bunch of blades, and it's actually gonna cut the dough into 36 different pieces.
Oh,
so
wow.
right now it did all the cutting. And now it's actually gonna round all the buns for us. And then from here, we put it into a rack and then into the proofer, where it's gonna rise for about 4 hours. Proofer is basically a hot, humid box that helps the dough rise without getting a skin.
And it does that for how long?
4 hours.
Wow. No wonder it takes so long to make one of these little buns.
All right, so these guys are fresh out of the proofer. So they've been sitting in the proofer for about 6 hours. Just waiting for us.
Okay.
And then what
This is
we
a big
do-
process, isn't it?
Oh, it
How
is.
long does it take to make a hot cross bun?
6 to 8 hours.
6 to 8 hours.
Yep.
That's a full shift.
So then what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna put our custard going right across the top.
And this is the Bavarian custard.
It is. So from here, then we put it in the oven for about 20 minutes, and then when they come out, we put a nice thin glaze on it to give it a nice look so that the buns don't dry out as well.
Okay.
And then we pack them and sell them.
All right, so there it is, our finished product, our hot cross bun. Yours looks prettier because I already ripped mine apart, but that's only, what, 8 hours in the making there?
Exactly.
Yeah, all in a day's work. Cheers.
Yeah. Cheers.
Happy Easter.
Exactly.
This is Stephen Bootsma with Bootsma Bakery. I'm Jeannette Rocher. Thanks for joining us. Have a happy Easter, everyone.